Nick Wright is not a fan of these player podcasts. He really doesn't think he thinks most of them aren't really good at all. And recently I came across a segment from First Things First with himself and Chris Broussard, Kevin Wiles, and they were discussing the pitfalls of having a podcast as an active player. And I thought that he made some pretty interesting points. Obviously, he did it with humor. So what we want to do is want to play exactly what Nick Wright had to say on FS1 about players of podcasts, and then want to come back and continue on the show. Take a listen to Nick Wright here.
Today, we look outwards to the player podcast world. Player podcasts are under duress, and to misquote a former president, I'm calling for a complete and full shutdown until we figure out what's going on. Because I know what's happened. People saw, you see, this player started a podcast, and that's how he connected with Taylor Swift. What could it do for me? Here's the answer. Not that, America. What it's going to do for you is cause dissension and disaster. Let's go through a short list. Debo starts a podcast on episode 1. Gets himself on the board. Pat Bev starts a podcast. Episode 1 through infinity, makes a fool of himself. Micah starts a podcast, raises coach's blood pressure, causes problems in locker rooms. Michael Porter Jr. starts a podcast. Hey. Don't listen to that. Certainly not at work. LeBron starts a podcast. The Lakers hire the co-host to be his head coach. The Knicks guys start a podcast called The Roommates Pod. Don't invite Julius Randle in. Now he's Instagramming, the truth will come out. And now it's impacting games. Here's CJ Stroud talking to Bears Jalen Johnson about a podcast that Jalen did, that Caleb listened to, that helped the Texans beat the Bears.
Stop telling your secrets on Richard Sherman podcast, dude.
What you mean?
The palms look. You ain't slick, brother. You ain't getting me. You ain't getting me.
Coach, he went on the podcast. He said this is what we do. CJ watched it. They then played, and he knew.
I like CJ more now than before. I love that he's listening to podcasts.
No, it's a great job by him, and everything CJ does makes him more likable and makes him seem smarter, all of it, including the fact he doesn't have a podcast. He goes on other people sometimes, he listens to them, and he uses them. Folks, you're not going to get Dua Lipa to marry you by doing a podcast. Just chill out. And let's just figure out what's happening here.
Can I give Nick like an A+?
I was good. Yes, and you give him an A+, Nick. This is definitely your best ombudsman segment for sure. You know, Coach and I are in agreement with you. You just think about it. You got 45 minutes to an hour to kill. You're going to say something you don't mean to say. You're going to give out some secrets that you're not supposed to. You're going to say something about an opponent that you're not supposed to, whether too good or too bad. And so it's tough, man.
More editors.
Well,
It's almost like everyone is like, all right, I got a host, check. I got the former player, check. Cameras, mics, we good? Like, we're good. Go. You need a real editor. Just like, hey, take that part out. You're playing CJ Stroud.
The thing is, if you take out the good stuff, it's not going to be a great podcast.
It doesn't matter.
It's just hard for players
You can take out the strategy like that. You can take out that.
But that's what people want.
So you heard what Nick Wright had to say. Here are my thoughts on this. As I said, I have a few thoughts. I'm not really a fan of it. I'm really not. And I'm going to speak from the standpoint of a fan, right? Let's look at the Paul George situation. There was a point last year where the Clippers are making a push to the playoffs, and then Paul George got injured a few weeks before the playoffs, like maybe a month or so before the playoffs. And a lot of Clipper fans were gutted by that news. So given the high expectations on the Clippers that season and everything they had invested into that team, it was kind of a make or break it year for the team. So when Paul George went down, it was a very, very deflating moment. And anytime we search news on the team or him, you were just hoping for good news. Maybe he's making progress with his rehab, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And to me, this is just me, it didn't sit well with me that, okay, here's a guy that we really want on the court, and he is rehabilitating, but then I see him on a podcast talking sports and talking all this, And to me, it just didn't sit well. Now, some people didn't see an issue with it. I personally didn't like it at a moment like that. I don't want to hear your thoughts on what's going on around the NBA. It would be better if you just kind of stayed away and just focused on what it is that you're doing. You know, so it didn't sit well with me, right? But then you have other players who I think have systemized their life so well that even if they do a podcast, they can kind of pull it off. But I think